Welcome to Coin Flip. I'm Derek Wu, and today we're tackling one of the most loaded questions in personal finance. Should you rent or should you buy? Here's the thing. You've probably seen the headline making the rounds. ATTOM's 2026 Rental Affordability Report found that buying a home is more affordable than renting in 57.7% of U.S. counties, more than half the country. Sounds like a clear answer, right? Not so fast. That number assumes a 20% down payment. It only compares monthly costs, and the counties driving that stat skew heavily toward the Midwest and the South. So if you live in a coastal city, that headline may not have anything to do with your life. Today, we're going to run the actual math. First up, we're going to put that ATTOM stat in proper context because a national average is not a decision. We'll look at what assumptions are baked into it and why it matters for your specific situation. Then we get into the number that most people miss. The mortgage payment is not your total cost. We'll look at what true monthly ownership actually runs once you factor in taxes, insurance, and maintenance. The gap might surprise you. After that, we'll talk about the single variable that drives this whole decision more than anything else, your timeline. There's a quick test you can run right on your phone right now to know whether buying even makes sense for you before you do another minute of research. And we'll close with a two-path framework. If the numbers say buy, here's what you do. If they don't, here's what you do instead. No agonizing, no waiting for perfect conditions. Good enough executed beats the optimal plan that never gets off the ground. To put this in perspective, this isn't about telling you renting is throwing money away or that home ownership is always the right move. The honest answer is that it depends, but it depends on specific, knowable things. And by the end of this episode, you know exactly what to look at. All right, let's start with that ATTOM headline and figure out what it's actually telling us and what it isn't.
Here's a headline that went everywhere a few months ago. ATTOM's 2026 Rental Affordability Report found that buying a home is cheaper than renting in 57.7% of U.S. counties, over half the country. Buying wins. Case closed, right? Not quite. That number is real. According to the mortgage reports, which covered the ATTOM data back in January, home ownership costs consumed a smaller share of wages than renting in 210 out of 364 counties analyzed. Those are real counties, real wages, real numbers. But here's what that number is built on. It assumes a 20% down payment. It compares monthly mortgage costs to monthly rent. And it is most favorable in the Midwest and South, where buying beats renting in over 81% and 66% of counties respectively. Flip to the West, and renting wins almost everywhere. So the headline is technically accurate, is also missing half the story. Think about it this way. If I told you a restaurant was rated the best in the city, but only surveyed people who ordered the pasta, you'd want to know more before making a reservation. Same logic applies here. The 57.7% figure only measures one thing, the monthly mortgage payment versus the monthly rent check. It does not measure property taxes. It does not measure insurance. It does not measure the roof that needs replacing or the water heater that quits on the Tuesday. That math comes later, and it changes the picture significantly. Here's the thing about the rent versus buy debate. People treat it like it has a universal answer. Buy now or wait. One size fits everyone. But it's actually a personal math problem with three variables: your market, your timeline, and your true monthly cost of ownership. I once had a client spend 4 months researching which index fund to buy. The difference between his top two choices? About $12 a year in fees. Meanwhile, he'd missed 4 months of market gains. The rent versus buy question can do the same thing. People fixate on the headline number and stall on the actual decision. So the better question isn't, should I buy? The better question is, what does your personal break-even actually look like? And to answer that, the mortgage payment is the wrong place to start. So what's the right number to use instead? So that 57.7% statistic tells you the mortgage payment is cheaper than rent. But here's the thing it doesn't tell you. The mortgage payment is the floor, not the ceiling.
I want to make that concrete. According to Yahoo Finance, a mortgage expert named Cody Schudebor recently walked a client through this in real time. She had a $625,000 home, 6% mortgage, 10% down. Monthly mortgage, $3,750. She thought that was her housing cost. It wasn't. Once you had property taxes, insurance, and a maintenance reserve, her actual monthly number was $5,065. That's a $1,315 gap every single month. And she did everything right. She had the down payment, she locked the rate, she ran the mortgage calculator. She just stopped one calculation too early. Here's why that gap exists. Non-mortgage ownership costs nationally average around $21,400 per year, according to Bankrate's Hidden Costs Study. That's roughly $1,800 a month just in taxes, insurance, and maintenance. So a $2,500 mortgage doesn't top out at $2,500. It tops out at somewhere north of $4,000. The important thing to understand is where that $1,800 goes. Property taxes are probably the most underestimated piece. Insurance premiums have jumped nearly 70% since 2021, and they're projected to climb another 16% by 2027. And then there's maintenance, which most people budget at 1% of home value annually. Financial professionals are increasingly saying 2% is the realistic floor in today's market, especially on older homes. So what does this mean practically? Here's a fast check you can run right now. Take your expected mortgage payment and multiply it by 1.4 to 1.7. That's your rough, true monthly ownership cost. If you're looking at a $3,000 mortgage, your real number is somewhere between $4,200 and $5,100. That's the number you compare to rent, not the mortgage. And notice what changes when you use that number. The rent versus buy math gets tighter. In a lot of markets, it flips entirely. This is why I keep saying the question isn't whether buying is cheaper in the abstract, it's whether buying is cheaper for your specific number, in your specific zip code, on your specific timeline. Which brings us to the next piece of this. Even if your true monthly cost pencils out, there's still a clock running. How long do you need to stay before that higher monthly spend actually pays off? That break-even timeline changes everything about this decision.
So now you know what ownership actually costs. The question is, does it even matter given how long you plan to stay? Here's the thing about the rent versus buy math. All the numbers in the world don't add up to a good decision if you ignore one variable, your timeline. According to Monarch Money, your timeline is the single most important factor in this whole decision. Here's why. Buying is front-loaded with costs. Closing costs alone typically run 2 to 5% of the purchase price. Transaction fees on top of that. You need years of appreciation and equity growth just to get back to zero. If you sell too early, you lose money no matter how good the deal looked on paper. So, what's the number? According to multiple 2026 analyses, the break-even point in most U.S. markets sits somewhere between 5 and 7 years. In high-cost coastal cities, it stretches further. JL Lending puts it plainly. If you plan to move in 24 months, renting is almost certainly the better call. You just won't see enough appreciation to cover the cost of selling. Under 3 years, renting wins. Full stop. According to Monarch, you won't have time to recoup closing costs or build meaningful equity. That's not a pessimistic take, it's just arithmetic. Now, here's a mental test I find useful. Ask yourself, could my job, my relationship, or even my zip code change in the next 24 to 36 months? If the honest answer is maybe, the math almost always favors staying put. And this is where I want to give you a tool you can actually use right now with your phone calculator. It's called the 5% rule. Take the price of the home you're considering, multiply it by 5%, divide it by 12. That number is your monthly break-even rent. If you can rent a comparable place for less than that, renting is likely the cheaper financial move. Quick example, $400,000 home times 5% equals $20,000. Divided by 12, that's about $1,667 a month. If similar rentals in that area go for more than that, buying starts to look better.
I used to tell clients to run a deep analysis before deciding anything. Spreadsheets, projections, sensitivity tables. And you know what I found? Half of them ended up paralyzed. Sound familiar?
Sometimes the most useful thing isn't the most precise thing, it's the thing you'll actually do. So here's where you stand after running these numbers. Either your timeline clears 5+ years and the 5% rule puts buying in your favor, or one of those two things doesn't hold. And if that's you, don't worry. We're going to talk about what to actually do with that down payment instead of letting it sit idle waiting for the right moment. So what happens if the numbers don't work yet? You've run the 5% rule, your timeline is under 5 years, and buying doesn't pencil out right now. That's not a consolation prize. That's just information. Here's the thing about a down payment sitting in a savings account. Parking it in cash while you wait isn't a neutral choice. Home prices historically appreciate around 3 to 4% annually, barely keeping pace with inflation. The S&P 500 has averaged closer to 10% over the long run. That gap matters. So the call is actually pretty clean. Your timeline is 5+ years and the numbers support buying? Buy. Under 5 years or still uncertain, invest the difference. Revisit in 12 months. Set a calendar reminder right now. My dad kept every dollar in a savings account his whole life, never invested. Still retired fine. The point isn't perfection. Good enough, executed, beats optimal, delayed. Make the call today and get back to your life. And that's the episode. Thanks for sticking with me through this one, because rent versus buy is one of those questions that sounds simple until you actually sit with the numbers. The thing I want you to walk away with is this. A headline stat like buying beats renting in the majority of U.S. counties, according to ATTOM's 2026 Rental Affordability Report, is a starting point, not a verdict. That 57.7% figure is real, but it assumes a 20% down payment and a monthly-only comparison, and it skews heavily toward the Midwest and South. Your zip code, your timeline, your actual monthly number, those are what decide things. And the actual monthly number is the part most people miss. A mortgage payment is the floor, not the ceiling. When you factor in taxes, insurance, maintenance, and HOA where applicable, the true cost of ownership runs significantly higher than what the listing calculator shows you. The key question, the one that cuts through all of it, is timeline. If you're staying 5 to 7 years or longer, the math on buying tends to work out. Under that, you probably haven't cleared the break-even point yet. So here's the two-path framework to keep in your back pocket. If your timeline supports it and the 5% rule math checks out when you run it on your phone, move toward buying. If neither of those conditions are met, invest the down payment and revisit in 12 months. That's a complete decision, not a stall. Does that make sense? The goal was never to tell you whether to rent or buy. The goal was to give you the 3 variables, your market, your timeline, your true monthly cost, so you can make that call yourself with clear eyes. Now, made a decision after today? That's a win. Subscribe so you're ready for the next one. And if there's a money choice you're stuck on, drop it in the reviews. I might just flip a coin on it next week. Thanks for listening to Coin Flip. I'm Derek Wu. Go make the call.